Welcome to 10-Minute Tuesdays. I'm drkerryann Williams. And Black Mental Health Matters is a podcast about everything related to mental wellness in the Black community and beyond. Ever wonder if you or a loved one is struggling with depression? It's more common than you think. In today's 10-Minute Tuesday, I'm going to talk to you about some signs of depression that are easy to miss. But here's a caveat. You shouldn't try to diagnose a major depressive disorder without the help of a professional. But you can learn to recognize certain signs that will tell you that it's time to make an appointment with a psychiatrist. So let's get into it. Okay. The sneaky thing about some of these signs is that some of them are non-specific. This means that some signs may or may not mean depression, but it's still important information to gather because it might all add up in the end. Take, for example, sleep disturbance. When the human body is stressed, whether physically or emotionally, one of the first things that gets disrupted is our sleep cycle. A disrupted sleep cycle could mean poor quality sleep, inability to fall asleep and stay asleep, or sleeping more than normal. When people start to experience depression, they often start to experience differences in their sleep patterns. So this is one of the things that psychiatrists look for and ask about at the first appointment, and generally at every appointment. How are you sleeping? Sleep, however, is also disrupted when people are anxious or if they have a medical problem that affects their biological rhythm. So sleep disturbance in and of itself does not equal depression, but poor sleep can be a sneaky, unrecognized feature of depression. Now let's look at appetite. What is your usual pattern of eating? At what times in the day do you normally get hungry? When people start to experience depression, another sneaky and unrecognized biological rhythm that gets affected is hunger. For some people, they lose their appetite. They can't explain why they're just not as hungry as they used to be. They start eating less. For others, they start eating more. They eat when they're not hungry. They engage in something called emotional eating, which is the use of food to alleviate emotional distress. Psychiatrists always ask about appetite. Now, low appetite does not equal depression, but it is important information to gather because it might all add up in the end. Poor sleep and poor appetite point to something going wrong internally. It might be depression, but it may be something else. So what else do we need to know? Let's talk about one of the more obvious things we look for when we think about depression. Mood. Do you feel sad? Well, that's a tricky one. Many of the people that I interview and ultimately diagnose with major depressive disorder, which is a formal diagnosis of depression, do not necessarily report sadness, believe it or not. Emotions are complex. Depression is not just about feeling sad. All of us go through times in life where we feel sad. But what if you start losing your sense of meaning in life? What if you start feeling as though you're just going through the motions? What if the things that you used to find fulfillment and joy in no longer bring any pleasure? That's not just sadness anymore. Let's take it a bit further. Psychiatrists pay close attention for signs of these three things: hopelessness, helplessness, and feelings of worthlessness. So let's zoom in a bit. Hopelessness. In your mind's eye, when you look into your future, what do you see? Do you see your life getting better? Do you see improvement from your current state? Do you feel any passion or excitement even about what the future holds for you? Alternatively, do you feel as though things will never get better? Do you have difficulty seeing any improvements from your current state? Do you in fact feel like things will get worse the further you go along? Are you struggling with hopelessness? Now, helplessness. Do you feel as though life happens to you and you do not have power or control over your circumstances? Do you feel knocked down by life, a victim of your circumstances with no way out? If you feel as though life is closing in on you with no feasible solution, you may be struggling with helplessness. depression has a way of blunting our problem-solving skills and making us feel powerless. It drains us of the energy that we need to start and to push through difficult circumstances or even everyday life. Now, the third thing was feelings of worthlessness. And this one is sneaky because it gets to us personally. This is where depression tells you that you have no value, that the world doesn't need you, and that you wouldn't be missed. Feelings of worthlessness are of great concern to mental health professionals because it fuels suicidality. I, as a psychiatrist and other mental health professionals, dedicate much of our lives to helping people to stay alive and to help them find meaning in their lives and to help them find value in themselves. Now, let me say this. This is a pre-recorded podcast. You can see the date on your screen. And I don't offer emergency services of any kind. So if you're listening and some of this is resonating with you and you feel like you're in a very vulnerable place in terms of experiencing feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, or worthlessness, the resources you should utilize include 911 or 988 for mental health services in the US, or otherwise you should seek emergency services wherever you are located. Your life is valuable. Now, as we come to the end of our time, I want to mention a couple other sneaky signs of depression. I spoke about sadness, but there are a couple of other things to think about. One is irritability, and the other is anxiety. Irritability. I like to think of a distinction between sadness and unhappiness. Follow me on this one. When people are sad, they often pull back and pull into themselves. When people feel unhappy, they can often pour out their unhappiness on other people. And that often looks like irritability and anger. Sometimes we label people as having an anger problem when they're actually depressed people. Psychiatrists are trained to look for this. Second is anxiety. I mention anxiety because there's this term used in psychiatry. It's a word called comorbid, and it's used when two diagnoses tend to run together very often. People who have depression often also have anxiety. People who have anxiety often also have depression. Psychiatrists always screen for both because it is more common to see those two things together than it is for them to be apart. And in that way, anxiety can actually be a sneaky sign that a person might also be depressed. All right, guys. That's it for today's 10-Minute Tuesday. This is definitely not a comprehensive lesson in the treatment of depression. I would not be able to do that in 10 minutes. And remember, you shouldn't try to diagnose a major depressive disorder without the help of a professional. Let me know if there's anything I touched on today that you'd like for me to speak more about. Thanks for joining me for this almost 10-Minute Tuesday. You've been listening to Black Mental Health Matters with Dr. Carryann. Take care and have a great week.